I entered the profession against my will, and I said it is a parasitic profession and all that. But the legend of the profession is something which is fascinating. You hear of great trials, a great cross-examination, great lawyers. It's a dream. It's your dream to fight for liberty. It's such a fascinating, very romantic subject. But then I never thought that my boon will be granted with such plenty.
Welcome to the KG Kannabiran Lectures on Law, Justice and Human Rights. It is now a decade since Kannabiran passed on. He was a man, take him all in all. I shall not look upon his like again. That was Hamlet. Kannabiran was a self-taught and self-made man. In a profession where godfathers and family and class meant everything, he rose from humble beginnings to legendary heights through sheer dedication and hard work. A prolific reader, he devoured every piece of literature that came his way as he struggled through school, college, and practice. It was precisely that reading which expanded his mind. What forged him into a legend was a sensitive and brilliant defense of political dissidents and revolutionaries who were hunted down by the state during the emergency. He converted the courtroom into a literary convention, often asking his clients to recite poetry or explain the philosophy for which they were charged to the judge. He prided himself on his radical interpretation of the law, often educating the judges before whom he appeared to interpret the spirit and intent of the Constitution. He was admired and loved for his fearless defense of causes, coupled with a deep tenderness for his poorer clients, which made him a much-loved figure in Andhra Pradesh. He inspired many young lawyers searching for some meaning and radical dimensions in the practice of law. As president of the Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberties Committee and the People's Union of Civil Liberties, he was critical to expanding these movements to powerful institutions of human rights defense. He was involved in human rights work across the country, which was idolized and adored, particularly in his home state, Andhra Pradesh, by the poor and disempowered and often resented by rich and powerful people unless they had a case or a cause they needed him to fight. It is now a decade since his death, and given the state of human rights today, his presence is sorely missed. This is an effort to preserve his heritage for the bright young lawyers who are emerging today, a generation that he sincerely believed would restore decency, dignity, and justice to our country. Thank you.
The family of KG Kannabiran welcomes you to the KG Kannabiran Lectures on Law, Justice and Human Rights. 10 years after his death, we remember his spirit, his resistance, and his constitutional insurgencies in courts and through courts and tribunals, in defense of dissent, personal liberty, associational freedoms, and justice, speaking truth to power, calling for judicial accountability and state accountability, especially in the matter of repressive laws, custodial violence, and extrajudicial murders, encounter killings, calling out entrenched practices of discrimination and structural violence, and setting out the basic structures of constitutional rule. We bring together a few of the lawyers and judges who knew him personally and worked with him on cases, campaigns, and tribunals to remember their collaborations with him and reflect on future pathways of this important slice of the history of lawyering for human rights and civil liberties, rooted in the Indian experience. KG Kannabiran lived and worked in Andhra Pradesh, in Hyderabad. He traveled across the country, appearing in courts of trial and high courts and in people's tribunals and fact-finding missions, From Kashmir, Assam and Manipur to Tamil Nadu, Chhattisgarh to Gujarat to Punjab, Karnataka and beyond. Within Andhra, every nook and corner, every forest and town bear his footprints. Practically every court in every jurisdiction in the state bears his imprint. Every university, meeting hall, meeting ground has heard him speak untiringly on the meanings of the rule of law and the Constitution. No place was out of bounds in his quest for justice. We hope to remember him through the futures of his work and through the work of those who carry it forward in so many different ways. In this specific segment of lectures, we bring together the voices of those who shared his calling. Henri Tiphagne, an advocate in the Madurai bench of Madras High Court, is a human rights lawyer, educator, and child rights advocate, founder and executive director of the Madurai-based human rights organization People's Watch. Over the past 4 decades, Henri Tiphagne has represented survivors of torture, caste atrocities, families of the disappeared, and most recently organized the People's Inquest into the police firing on Sterlite protesters in Thoothukudi in May 2018. Under his leadership, People's Watch has become a center for legal documentation of human rights cases in areas ranging from custody to environmental concerns and child rights. Henri Tiphagne is chairperson, International Dalit Solidarity Network, and executive committee member of the World Organization Against Torture. In 2018, he was selected under the individuals category for the Nani A. Palkhiwala Award for Civil Liberties and was the first Indian to receive the 8th Human Rights Award by Amnesty International, Germany.
Mr. Kannabiran has a lot in common to do with the city from which I work. Kanna, as we affectionately called him, was born in the city of Madurai, and very interestingly in the central jail at Madurai, because his father, Mr. Kandala Gopalasamy Iyengar, worked as a jail doctor here. He therefore had a very special affection for Madurai, the people in Madurai, the streets of Madurai, and therefore several events took place of significance that we need to recall. But at the outset, let us not forget that for me personally, as a young lawyer as I was, my association with Kanna started when I was a law student and not as a lawyer. And as a law student who worked with the PUCL in building a unit of the PUCL in the city of Madurai, guided by Dr. Venkatraman as its president from the American College. And therefore my association with Kanna started through the PUCL and me being a law student. The greatest privilege of that was that from the beginning, as a student, I became a student of human rights lawyering, and human rights being the core of my profession, being mentored by somebody as great as Kanna. I studied in the Madurai Law College and initiated the Madurai unit of the PUCL. And my first case in the PUCL for a fact-finding happened also in the year 1982. In February 1982, when Mr. Nallakamu, of Army veteran, was tortured by the police of Vadipatti police station in Madurai district, was tied in a leading chain and dragged in the public in the bus stand, before the bus stand of Vadipatti police station. His wife, a school teacher, was also abused in the police station, tortured, along with his son, kept in custody, remanded in a false criminal case that was registered. Whenever Kanna had an opportunity of coming to Madurai, this happened to be a case I always used to refer to him for guidance. And one thing he told us, never allow a single police officer who engages in illegal detentions, torture, killings, etc. to go scot-free. The PUCL has to ensure that you follow them up from the first case, because if you don't do that, these are the people who take law into their hands. And this is exactly what happened in Nalakamu's case. Nalakamu, in spite of all our efforts, continued to register himself as a DSP through direct recruitment. In spite of the recruitment being temporary, managed to wink everybody up there in powers, became an ASP and then an SP. And if you look at his career from 1982 onwards, this man ensured that the trial in the case continued for almost 20 years thereafter. He was extremely clever in ensuring that there were several warrants over a period from 1995 to almost 2001 against him, to ensure that the trial never took place. But this man thereafter ensured that he was involved in series of cases. The John Joseph case of 1997 in Kanyakumari district, where he tortured John Joseph, molested two Catholic nuns, abuses to the core are on his record. In 2004, he did the same once again to me and several other colleagues in Kadalur when he was the SP, and ensured that we were registered in a false criminal case, which we got over only in the year 2017. We had to pursue the case meticulously to ensure that in 2006, finally, he was dismissed from service. But before that, Khanna appeared in the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court in the appeal that was filed to ensure that this man was convicted. So from 1982 to almost 2004, Khanna at different stages guided and finally appeared before the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court for 2 long days, arguing this case to ensure that this policeman, Prem Kumar, later an SP, was convicted, and finally we ensured that in 2006 he was removed from service. This is the starting of my PUCL work, but a PUCL come lawyering work that followed. My very close encounter with Khanna happened to be in the month of June 1993. I had the privilege of being selected and provided all the facilities to participate in the Second World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna. And this conference was from the 14th of June to the 25th of June 1993, known widely as the Vienna Conference. And to my surprise, Khanna was there. I still remember Ravi Nair was there, Dr. Ruth Manorama was there, and I had the privilege, therefore, of assisting Khanna throughout those days, both in the NGO conference that preceded the World Conference and the formal conference with participants from over 177 countries from throughout the globe, with over 800 registered NGOs and almost over 700 to 800 media personnel. We were a big group. First experience of an international conference, but with Kannabiran, whom I was able to assist and therefore learn from him from close quarters of what are the interventions to be made. I remember the conference was very special to us because it launched, it was the foundation for the formation in 1993 of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, which never existed before. This whole discourse on the universality of human rights took place in Vienna. The UN Decade for Human Rights Education, with which I happened to be associated later, was something that was born out from Vienna. The National Plan of Action for Human Rights, which several countries thereafter followed. India is yet to have its first National Action Plan, which it has passed on to the NHRC to start, and it has not started while other countries have gone to their third national action plan. The first global tribunal on violence against women took place in the same World Conference, which led to the slogan that was raised there, women's rights are human rights. We were all witness to all these events that took place in Vienna. I remember Kanna participating in the plenary session. And when it came to the issue of resolutions being passed in the NGO forum on state violence, where there were some remarks being made about India and he was not being heard, he was sitting next to me, and in a second I saw Kanna standing on a chair, talking at the top of his voice of what the Indian constitution meant and how state killings by police and law enforcement officials could not be tolerated, and therefore he would not allow that resolution to be passed. He participated very actively in the workshops that were held in the sidelines, particularly at that time on the happenings in Sri Lanka. And it is those days itself that I was witness to Kanna's anger at the violations of human rights that took place in our neighboring country, Sri Lanka. The next major acquaintance that I needed to point out was particularly in the case of the Special Task Force. This was an accompaniment that Kanna made, sometimes from far, sometimes very close to us. The Special Task Force happened to be constituted jointly by the governments of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, largely to ensure that they were able to capture this Veerappan whom they were looking to capture somewhere in the border areas of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. In April 1997, by which time People's Watch was formed, and for all of you who need to know the connection, it was the Vienna Conference. And by my being mentored by Kanna in the Vienna Conference, that was responsible for me coming back, recalling many things that my teacher, my mentor, had built within me, leading to saying, I cannot continue my work in the way I was doing. I needed to monitor human rights at close quarters. Monitor and make accountable the state for the violations I was seeing, and at the same time, ensure that a culture of human rights was that we had to contribute to. This People's Watch received in April 1997, which was born in December 1995, in April 1997, received a letter from the Mysore Central Prison from one Arul Das. This was a postcard. And that little postcard, and thereafter the many others that followed, listed out the violations that were taking place in the border areas of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Believe me, we did not ever come to know through our news media that these events were actually taking place in the border areas. I want to recall the services of Advocate John Vincent, who practices today before the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court, has been also the president of the Bar Association of the Madurai bench of the advocates in the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court. John Vincent immediately went to the Mysore Central Jail and met people. He came back with shocking news. And it was this shocking news that made us resolve that we definitely had to undertake a fact-finding into that. The fact-finding that followed in the year 1997 and continued till 1998 with great difficulty in the interior-most areas, border areas of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, in Salem, Erode and Coimbatore districts, revealed to us the illegal detentions, not of days, not of weeks, not of months, in cases years, of people who are kept, custodial torture of various forms, custodial violence against women of the most gruesome forms that continued after one, after one, after one police officer, up to the ranks of Mr. Devaram himself, a former DGP of the government of Tamil Nadu, who was heading the joint STF in those days. There were two types of actions that we were therefore engaged. One, appearing on behalf of the accused in 4 sessions cases. 2 relating to the Ramapura police station, where 6 policemen are alleged to have been killed in one case and 5 policemen alleged to have been killed in another case. And thereafter in 2 other sessions cases related to MM Hills, where in one case 6 policemen were alleged to have been killed, along with 7 others who were injured, and an 8-member Veerappan gang also killed. And in the second case, an explosion killing around 21 members of a Tamil Nadu jungle party. So these were the 4 sessions cases that were pending. The accused were kept in the Mysore Central Prison. They were about 121 accused totally. Many of them had been kept under illegal detention for long periods, tortured, raped, with all sorts of sexual acts before other members who had been taken into custody, men and women, men performing in front of women, women performing in front of men. You cannot name it. It was so gruesome. But there was no trial. The trial was yet to start. And therefore, in the year 1999, we approached Mr. Kannabiran as a lawyer. And Mr. Kannabiran, who was then the president of the National PUCL, willingly agreed and approved a draft writ petition number 130 to 169 of 1999, which was drafted by Mr. V. Suresh, which was cleared by Kanna, and Kanna came to Bangalore in the month of August 1999, stayed till September, October, and ensured that the High Court heard us on actually fast-tracking the trials in those TADA cases that were all pending before the TADA court in Mysore. But as the cases were being argued in Bangalore, we saw that the trial in the cases commenced. And as the trial commenced, then, of course, the writ petitions were finally concluded. And in August 2001, the final arguments were to take place in the 4 sessions cases. And though the trial was conducted by Mr. John Vincent, guided by Mr. Gopalakrishna Lakshmana Raja from GK from Madurai, Kanna came for the briefing and did the final arguments in the case in August 2001 in Mysore. Kanna was not only a civil liberties activist, but a lawyer to us in our STF engagements, therefore. We continued. On the 29th of September was a judgment in this case, where out of the 129 accused, 14 were convicted and 107 were acquitted, as there was no case against them. Of the 14 acquitted, 7 had life imprisonments, and 7 others had shorter periods of which they had already undergone and therefore were free. We prepared appeals before the Supreme Court. The appeals were cleared by Mr. Kannabiran, and on the 28th of January 2002, these appeals were admitted before the Supreme Court. And on 2003 September, after Kanna had argued these matters, the judgment was given where 4 people in one case alone, the 3 cases all were acquitted. In one case alone, the Supreme Court thought it right to enhance the punishment, and life imprisonment was turned to capital punishment for Simon, Bilavendran, Jnanaprakasam, and Misakara Madayan. Thus, this was a long period of engagement that we had with Kanna, with his legal acumen in the High Court in Karnataka, in the TADA court in Mysore, up to the Supreme Court in arguing these matters. And these were occasions when we could see him at very, very close quarters. And let me tell you, we were very, very affectionate towards him. As I told you in the beginning, he was a father figure to us. But no nonsense, no nonsense. While the bundles were being prepared, while the case was being prepared, when he asked questions and when we were not prepared, he always used to remind us that it is not important only to do civil liberties and human rights work out of court. And that as lawyers, we had a very, very important role to ensure that we were the topmost practitioners, so that court's attention would always be on what we said and how we said it. Now, I need to go back in history to recall another very close acquaintance with Khanna, which goes to 1982, back to 1982. In the year 1982, after this Nallakamu case that I taught to you, I decided as the secretary of the Madurai PUCL, along with the entire unit, that we would be observing 2 weeks to commemorate and recall and condemn ultimately the police violence that was taking place in the state. So from the 16th to the 30th of October, to the 31st of October, 1982 was these 2 weeks. And these 2 weeks were evenings, mornings, with meetings, exhibitions, screening of movies, public meetings in the night, all sorts of performances, but all focused only on police violence. You can imagine me in 1982, a law student who was found learning more law on the streets of Madurai than in the classrooms of the law college, who was taking the police for a ride with my small little activities with the People's Union for Civil Liberties, which was actually molding me. And this 2 weeks was to culminate on the 31st of October with a hall meeting, which was to be preceded by a silent procession from the Kattabamman Salai, as we used to call, located between the Periyar bus stand and the railway station in Madurai. And we were supposed to walk along with a black ribbon tied across because we could not speak about police atrocities. Justice Tarkunde, the then president of the PUCL, had been invited. Khanna was also there. We were hardly 25 of us gathered. There were almost 300 to 400 armed policemen, posted just near the place where we had assembled. And therefore, a number of people, including those who held positions in the PUCL at the state level, were all hesitating to come and join the procession, and were all gathered in different parts near Kattabamman Salai. And that is where the police decided to lathi charge. Before the procession started, they arrested those whom they could. They, of course, were looking for me. I was in my final year of law. My exams were to take place in another 1 month. I had a number of papers to complete. I had recently, I was already married then, and therefore there was no chance for me to get caught with the police. Because had they caught me that day, that would have been the end of my life. I ran for my life and ensured I was protected. Unfortunately, Kannabiran, Tarkunde, Kannabiran, and 15 others were arrested by the police and taken to the then B4 police station. And when they heard the policeman asking, what has happened to this fellow? But the fellow was not there. They were searching for Henri, and Henri was not there. Khanna had been beaten in that lathi charge. I still remember later I had an occasion to meet him underground because I had still not surrendered and the police were after me, but I could not allow Khanna to leave Madurai city without seeing him, and therefore I went to the place. We had a clandestine meeting taking place in the Rural Theological Institute Then when Dr. Dhyan Chand Kar, a close friend of Kanna, was the director, so we had a night meeting there. When Kanna realized after a good hot water bath that there were lots of injuries on his head in different parts of the body, I apologized to him and he said, no, this is part of the game, but unfortunately you escaped from all this. Friends, Justice Tarkunde then happened to be the counsel for the state of Tamil Nadu, and therefore the case was withdrawn in a few weeks from that. Kanna was safely transported. We were all released on bail. I surrendered, and then we ensured, we were quite happy thereafter that the cases were withdrawn. But that was my initiation into human rights work. The 2 weeks of awareness building on police atrocities that had taken place had to end with the police led by none other than Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was the DSP of that jurisdiction, to come forward to give us this kind of a treatment. And Kanna was A2 in that case, while Tarkunde happened to be A1, and my colleague Satyamurthy was A3. Many of those who were accused in that case then are no more today. Not only Tarkunde, not only Kanna, also Yadartha Rajan, Xavier Arukyasamy, TSV Hari, and many others who were all there are no more today. I think it is important thereafter to also recall Kanna's contribution, particularly to the establishment of Human Rights Court in Tamil Nadu. This was a very major contribution, and we as People's Watch had the privilege of appearing in court in that particular matter to ensure we were assisting the court. This was very interesting case that originated in the state of Tamil Nadu, in the district of Erode. And this was by Mr. V.P. Gunasegaran from the Tribal People's Association, who had preferred a complaint to the Chief Judicial Magistrate of Erode. And in this complaint before the Chief Judicial Magistrate of Erode, V.P. Gunasegaran was raising the issues of the violence by the Special Task Force, which I had referred to earlier, against the tribals in the Talawadi Hills. And since we were all so taken up by the 1993 Protection of Human Rights Act and Section 30 of the Protection of Human Rights Act, which permitted the constitution of a human rights court, and sessions courts were designated as human rights courts, he filed a complaint before the Chief Judicial Magistrate. His counsel was Mr. Balamurugan, advocate, who later also became the secretary of the Tamil Nadu unit of the People's Union for Civil Liberties. But to their misfortune, the Chief Judicial Magistrate Court returned the complaint with a few questions. And the questions were questioning the jurisdiction of the Sessions Court to try offenses of human rights violations. Balamurugan was no lawyer to keep quiet. Trained in the PUCL, he immediately, in the year 1996, ensured that this petition which was returned was forwarded by him to several people. One, to Justice B.R. Krishna himself, asking for his intervention. Two, to Justice Ranganath Mishra, then chairman of the National Human Rights Commission. Third, to Kanna himself as the president of the People's Union for Civil Liberties. And then to Mr. Justice V.M. Tarkunde. Justice V.R. Krishna on the 11th of November 1996 decided that he will forward this letter with his own covering letter to Justice K.S. Swamy, the then Chief Justice of the Madras High Court. Justice C.S. Swamy, K.S. Swamy, approached, communicated with, got in touch with the then Joint Secretary of the Tamil Nadu PUCL, who was Dr. Suresh, received communications from them in detail, and then set in motion a criminal revision case under Article 227 of the Constitution in a bench comprising Justice Janathanan and Justice Karpagavanayagan. Justice Janathanan and Justice Karpagavanayagan had several lawyers, Sudha Ramalingam, Suresh, Nagasaila, P.V. Bhaktavachalam himself, and the Bar Association. The National Human Rights Commission was represented. And then the PUCL requested People's Watch, which had just then established a documentation center to provide the lawyers and through the lawyers, the court, all the reading materials on human rights courts that were existing globally. I still remember meticulously working at this documentation and knowing that by none other than Kanna. Every page had to be seen and approved by Kanna. Very, very meticulous work. Lots of demands were placed. We engaged ourselves in doing good secondary research for these materials. And then Kanna was there on his feet for almost a week, arguing this matter before Justice Janathan and Karpagavanayagan. And then the final verdict was given, where the district courts, all the modalities of how a proceeding could be initiated before a court of session, as with original jurisdiction, was the final judgment that we were able to obtain before the Madras High Court. And unfortunately, though we got a very good judgment, I still remember Kanna arguing in that court, saying that there should not be any form of prior sanction for prosecuting a policeman before a human rights court. And he said, I remember the arguments where he forcefully, for a long period of time, tried to impress the judges, saying that the fact that there is the establishment of a human rights court at the district level under the Protection of Human Rights Act is by itself a statutory sanction that in every case where there are allegations made against police officials, you do not need a separate sanction. However, this did not stand before the two-member division bench, but these were very, very serious arguments that were presented before the Human Rights Court. Now, these are some of the major interventions that we have been engaged in. As I said, in the Human Rights Court case, in the Prem Kumar case, very meticulously in the Prem Kumar case, in the procession that was held in Madurai, and of course the STF case and the Vienna conference. But what is more important is that I did not have too much of opportunity to only appear and work with Kanna as a lawyer. My engagements always, because I moved into full-time People's Watch work in the year 1995, and thereafter, I had more opportunity of working with him in looking at institutions like the National Human Rights Commission. And in that context, I still remember how critical Kanna used to be when the constitution of the NHRC took place in the year 1993. And these were the years when I also had an opportunity of being close to him in Vienna, and therefore these long conversations used to go. Kanna was one of the fiercest opponents of the constitution of an NHRC. And even though he saw some benefits that were coming out in terms of the NHRC many years thereafter, his fierce opposition to the constitution of the NHRC continued. He said, as long as we do not strengthen our criminal courts in the country and fight violations of human rights through the courts, through private complaints that we might undertake, and follow them up meticulously with good legal representation before courts, and ensure that policemen who violate the law are punished under criminal law and are made to pay compensation from their own pockets. If we are not at that, any other form of dealing with human rights will not help promote a human rights culture that will last for long. And Kanna was right. Today, when you see what is happening to the National Human Rights Commission, 25 years later, Kanna is not here to hear me say that Kanna in 1993 was right. He foresaw what will happen to this institution. Today in the NHRC we have, and luckily Kanna did not see it, but he made us always have a third eye on this institution. And today we are able to see that several functionaries directly from the Ministry of Home Affairs are posted from the Ministry of Home Affairs to the NHRC. Not only posted from the NHRC, no, from the Home Ministry. You have raw officers posted in very, very vital positions within the NHRC. I would not like to say more. It is because of this grooming that we received from Kanna that I was able to constitute and build in later years in 2010. Almost during his last few days, build the All India network of individuals and NGOs working with national and state human rights institutions only with the purpose of monitoring these institutions. But this is what Kanna foresaw. And Kanna was categoric. No tribunals, no commissions. It is courts and courts of law alone which should be prime of importance in this country. And I would like to emphasize that at this point of time. It is important that we take note of some of what he had told us because they are important. The second was with the United Nations. He himself was not directly involved with the United Nations because he did not have time for that. But he never ran against the United Nations and was always encouraging us to intervene in various special procedures of the United Nations to make sure that every violation of human rights that takes place at the grassroots is taken up in different fora, not only in the lower courts, not only in the lower trial courts, not only in the high courts and the Supreme Court, but also before the NHRC and the United Nations, the various special procedures in the United Nations. In the year 1998, after the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders had come up, I remember he was so convinced that he had a very long, very detailed memorandum that he submitted to the National Human Rights Commission on human rights defenders and the role that the NHRC had to play with human rights defenders. And he not only gave that representation to the NHRC, he ensured that that representation was meticulously followed. He used to send reminders to the NHRC to ensure that his memorandum was taken up. He was always present before the NHRC when occasions permitted him to be present to remind them of their role to ensure protection of human rights defenders within and outside the country. And therefore, while he continues to remain a father figure to us, activists, we will never forget that for us, he was always a teacher. There were a number of other occasions relating to Sri Lanka, relating to interventions made on different other issues that we worked with him in the city of Madurai, which I don't want to record here, because that is not the purpose of this lecture. But for us, he always remained a lawyer with a dedication. And the message for us was to always subvert the system. And that is the mandate he provided us. And to be able to subvert the system from within, he always told us that we had to be the best among the lawyers, which involved reading, preparing well for cases, and ensuring that we are able to tilt the law in favor of our clients who are usually victims of gross human rights violations, and make the judge listen to us because we have some contributions to make. For him, a human rights lawyer could never be a third-grade lawyer. For him, a human rights lawyer had always to be the best lawyer possible. I may not have had the opportunity to do lawyering the way Khanna wanted because of the options I had made. But now when I'm back in court, but Khanna is not there, these words of Khanna guide me through every petition that I am engaged in before the High Court. The last point is the way lawyers have to weave our public life and our professional life. And our public life being our life with the human rights movement, how it has to be woven into our lawyering. And that is precisely what we have continuously been doing. I will not forget the lighter moments as well with Khanna. We had to wait for those lighter moments because the work had to be over for those lighter moments to come. What he loved in the city of Madurai, because he was born here, as I told you, was never to dine in a hotel. My office those days happened to be in the American College buildings, adjoining the compound wall of American College, and right opposite used to be the Mudaliyar Idli Kadai. And whenever he came at night for dinner had to be in the Mudaliyar Idli Kadai. And the Mudaliyar Idli Kadai, you had to sit on the pavement, and he would enjoy the idli and the dosa with all the different chutneys that night life in Madurai provided him. That was his desire. Never would he want to eat anywhere else but on the streets, enjoying the nightlife of Madurai. That was Khanna. Khanna, in spite of being such a firm lawyer, such a disciplined lawyer, always ensured that he left a very deep impression on all of us. That impression was so strong that it continues. And you see him behind, making sure that I'm speaking the truth. And I want to tell you that wherever we are, wherever we speak, we say, we acknowledge in public that we are mentored by a person as noble as Khanna himself. Thank you.